Yo guys, Vision SJ here, bringing you Marvel Rivals 5 best DPS heroes in the game right now in Season 1, how to play them including gameplay, pros and cons of each of the 5 heroes, their abilities, how you use them, when to use them, and what you want to avoid doing as a DPS player in this game in order to support your team and win your games. If you like the video, do not forget to like, comment and subscribe, and if I miss anyone that you have on your list that you think should be in here, let me know down below in the comments, and let's get right into it. Coming in at number 5 is none other than Hela, the goddess of death. Hela is a very powerful and yet very simple character to use. She relies on hitting a lot of shots, especially critical shots, to bring down opponents. In this gameplay here in the practice range, you'll see me landing a lot of hits against these practice bots. What you'll notice is, anytime I land a critical shot, i.e. a headshot, the bot will die roughly 50% quicker than landing normal shots to the body or the limbs. Now against standing still targets, this is very simple and quite easy to master. However, the trick with a character like Hela is learning how to hit moving targets, especially flying targets, as that appears to be where the skill gap lies. However, the problem I find with most duelist players is their positioning and pacing on the map. You really want to be in front of your healers, utilising them while supporting them from diving characters, as well as using your tanks as bodyguards, whilst you can do a lot of damage from sitting behind them, focusing purely on damage and using your ranged abilities. And this is where most Hela players get it wrong. They get too up close and personal and involved in the chaos, where she can't deal as much damage. Hela's also a squishy character with only 250 health, and only one real ability to evade from situations, using her Astral Flock L1 on PlayStation to evade. And it's important to understand that not all duelist heroes are going to work for you every single map. It depends on who you have on your team, what map you're playing, what opponents you're playing against. All of these things factor into how a character or how a hero excels. And I found in my experience that Hela isn't as effective when you play against diving characters such as Wolverine, Iron Fist, and even Spiderman. Similar to when you have a Moon Knight or a Squirrel Girl on your team, you're just not going to be that as effective as Hela, as you need that up close and personal style DPS on your team. So just bear that in mind when you're picking Hela, because your teammates can directly influence how effective of a game you're going to have as Hela and the overall experience of that game. Overall, Hela has 3 basic abilities. Her L1, Astral Flock, allows her to temporarily fly and evade from situations when needed. Her R1, known as Soul Drainer, is a mini explosive device, not that powerful but can be used in situations to get her out of danger. And her L2, also known as Piercing Knight, which is a really powerful ability. If you place it in between multiple opponents, you'll see it's more effective that way, as the blast radius is super deadly. And Hela's passive ability, Strong Crow Storm, generates a crow after defeating an enemy, which explodes after a short duration. And finally, Hela's ultimate ability, which is so powerful and pretty much the main reason she's in my top 5. She's often banned at the higher divisions because it's so effective. You simply just fly into the sky and you go into this first person point of view, and you simply just throw, using R2, explosive bolts down onto the ground. They deal a lot of splash damage, and it's also worth mentioning her team-up ability with Thor and Loki, Queen of Hell. When she defeats an enemy, she can instantly resurrect Loki and Thor in the respawn phase, or grant them bonus health if they're still alive. So bear this in mind when picking your characters as a team and as a player. Coming in at number 4 is the Winter Soldier, also known as Bucky Barnes. One of the funnest and coolest duelists in the game by a mile, and most certainly belongs in this top 5. Similar to Hela, Bucky's primary attack, the Roster Stern, which is his revolver that shoots powerful bullets, is super effective when you land critical shots. His team-up ability with Rocket is super fun and overpowered to use, just like the Punisher. Rocket throws down an ammo overload device, which allows him to have infinite ammo and an increased fire rate for a short period of time. This is super overpowered and is one of the main reasons people have Bucky Barnes so high up on their list when they're ranking their duelists. Winter Soldier is the perfect hybrid duelist in this game. He can play close quarters and ranged engagements very effectively. Using his Trooper's Fist, by pressing L1, allows him to leap towards opponents, launching them into the sky and providing him with a bonus shield. When paired with his ultimate ability, the Kraken Impact, makes him virtually unkillable. He will launch himself into the sky and dive down using his bionic arm. When he lands, he'll mark the target with this red health bar. If you damage the enemy enough to go below that point, he will regenerate his ultimate ability over and over, and you'll hear him say, again. which tells you he's regenerated his ultimate ability. And for anyone that's played against a Bucky Barnes knows exactly how annoying this can be when someone goes on a streak and continuously keeps taking out your team over and over again, and it's a real problem to deal with. And it's also worth mentioning that Bucky doesn't have hit scan on his shots, but because the gun shoots so fast, this isn't really an issue anyways. But overall, Bucky is a really high DPS character and can sustain pretty well for a duelist. Overall, the Winter Soldier is a really versatile character and can be used in many different ways and also with many different characters, which is the key part. Because often you'll find you can't pick certain characters that you may want to try based on who your teammates pick, which is always just a big problem for games like this. But for Winter Soldier, as I mentioned, he can be used in all sorts of different ways, and you can just pair him with so many different styles that it doesn't really matter who's on your team for the most part. As long as you know how to use him and you can hit your shots, your teammates won't really give you a hard time for picking Winter Soldier. And that's why he comes in at number 4 on this list. He's such a versatile duelist with high DPS and can be used with almost any other DPS on the game. Coming in at number 3 is Iron Man. Now, if this list wasn't already controversial enough, this is where the controversy starts for me. Because making the final 3 was so difficult, and I appreciate you can swap any of these in and out for the next 3. I mean, for the most part, even nailing it down to 5 was already hard enough. There are so many duelists in this game. I think there are 19 in total. Making it just 5 was already really difficult to do, and for me, there was quite a few that I want to mention at the end, just to clarify why I picked these 5. There are a handful of heroes that are game changers across all 3 categories, and Iron Man belongs in that list. When you play or have a good Iron Man on your team, you know it. And when you play against a good Iron Man, he is a real problem to deal with. He's not the hardest character to learn or use by any means, but he has a real high ceiling, and when paired with the likes of Hulk, he is almost unstoppable, which is why a lot of players at the higher levels just ban him because he's just not worth the aggro to deal with and can create so many issues for your team when you come across a good Iron Man. And that's why he's in the top 3 of this list. He's such a problem to deal with, and a lot of people even have him as their number 1 on their list, which is of course where the controversy kicks in, and that's not even to mention about his ultimate ability, which is super overpowered. So how do you use Iron Man? As I said, he's quite a simple character to learn, but the trick is learning how to use his abilities and when. By pressing circle allows Iron Man to go into hyper velocity state, which increases his speed and allows him to evade from situations very well. He can also unleash a micro missile barrage by pressing X. When flying near enemies, this is really useful to use. Iron Man also has an armor overdrive ability by pressing triangle, which enhances the damage output of his repulsor blast and his unibeam. When paired with Hulk, he gets a gamma overdrive ability, which is the same thing but has a gamma upgrade and happens to be one of the most broken abilities in the game right now, which is acquired through his team-up ability with Hulk. He also has a devastating pulse cannon as his ultimate, which is fired in the targeted direction of which you're looking, and has an insanely overpowered blast radius. And that is why Iron Man, for me, is in the top 3 of best DPS players in this game right now. Coming in at number 2 is one of my favourite characters in all of Marvel, is Moon Knight. Moon Knight has to be in this top 5 for sure. Whether he's number 2 on your list is up for debate, but for me, he is definitely number 2 in this game right now. We've all played against Moon Knight, and he's a real problem to deal with just like Iron Man, especially when he's paired with Cloak and Dagger, who happens to be the most commonly used support in the game right now. Moon Knight, when paired with Cloak and Dagger, gains the full Moon ability, where he can go invisible and deal an insane amount of DPS for a short period of time, which is his team-up ability, and activated by pressing triangle. When combined with his Ancient Ank ability, this makes him one of the deadliest DPS characters in the game by a mile. He can take out 3 targets at once in insane speeds. I think he's got to have one of the fastest damage per second kill rates in the game. I'm not exactly sure on the numbers, but it's one of the best for sure. His Ank is just super overpowered and super easy to use for the most part. Like some DPS, the key thing to understand with Moon Knight is his positioning on the map. He's far more effective when you play those almost off angles, areas where he cannot be seen, but he can deal a lot of damage based on his Ank. One thing to note when using Moon Knight is he's not going to be as effective when he's paired with a hero such as Hela or Squirrel Girl, so just bear that in mind, as you need almost a diving style hero on your team in order to use Moon Knight at his best. So how do you use Moon Knight? He's a ranged character that can deal damage to multiple enemies with a single shot. By pressing R2 as his primary attack using the Crescent Dart, you can deal damage to up to 3 enemies with a single shot. Unlike some DPS, Moon Knight has great movement, where he can double jump by pressing X, he can glide around, and he can also use a grapple. These are all super effective when you're trying to evade or push out enemies. For the most part, you'll rely on using his Ancient Ankh to deal the most amount of damage, which is activated by pressing R1 and can be placed on walls, floors, and ceilings. You want to master placing these in strategic spots where the enemies can't see them, and then use his Crescent Dart by pressing R2, and his Moonblade by using L2. And as I mentioned, don't forget to use his movement, which is really good, by pressing L1 to glide and circle to use his grapple to get to key spots on the map. His Full Moon ultimate ability has to be one of the easiest and yet most powerful abilities in the game, and if it's paired with a Doctor Strange ult or a Groot ult, it is so effective. And that's why Moon Knight is number 2 on this list. And coming in at number 1 is my favourite mutant in all of the comics and one of my favourite characters in the game, Storm. And it's criminal how many people don't realize how powerful she is right now in this game. I've seen players complain about people picking her and saying you should go this and you should go that because she's no good. And it's ridiculous. She is definitely one of the best DPS characters in the game right now, and it's not even close. And I came across a stat the other day that broke down all of the win rates across each of the 35 characters in Marvel Rivals, and Storm was number 1 on that list. I mean, I'm not surprised one bit. She is an Omega level mutant after all. And as I mentioned, this list was always going to be controversial for many players, and I appreciate some people don't even quite understand Storm and what she's capable of, but she is definitely in this list for sure, and for me, ranks at number 1. So how do you use Storm? For the most part, just like Hela and other ranged characters, you need to be able to land your shots. By pressing R2, activates her Wind Blade, which is her primary attack. Storm's Windblade primary attack is very powerful and really simple to use. You just have to land your shots as I mentioned, and you can take out other enemy aerial DPSs with ease. You can also use her Bolt Rush ability by pressing R1, which unleashes a lightning bolt in the direction you're facing and is quite powerful. As Storm can control the weather, she provides her team with good movement and damage buffs. As you can see, her movement is actually pretty good and needs to be utilised when flying in the air to stop yourself from getting shot, but also you need to stay low enough so that your teammates can heal you. So just bear that in mind, as it's really easy to be isolated that way when you're too high up in the air or too far from your teammates where you can't be healed. So make sure you play backline and observe from the air where you are and where your teammates are so that you can provide support whilst also protecting your healers and keeping them alive. And don't get me wrong, you can definitely play frontline in this character and get aggressive, especially when you have your teammates around you. You can utilise her triangle ability, which manipulates the weather, providing either a speed boost for a temporary period of time, or a damage boost, which is really effective. What you'll notice is you'll have numbers on the left and right side of your screen in blue and red. It will tell you how many teammates you have in your radius, which will then tell you exactly how many teammates you're about to boost when you press triangle. The red number indicates how many enemies you have within Storm's radius, so just bear that in mind when you're considering using the damage buff. The symbols in the middle of the screen are either a wind symbol, which indicates you have an active movement buff, or the lightning bolt symbol, which indicates you're using the damage buff. And finally, Storm's ultimate ability, which is super simple and fun to use and is really effective in tight areas where you have multiple enemies all grouped up on either the objective or in doorways. And just as a little tip, check the red number as I mentioned, that indicates how many enemies are within your radius, which will give you an idea on how many enemies you're about to crowd control when using her ult. Here's a little clip that I got when I first started playing this game and I was testing out all of the characters in the game, and this was actually my first time using Storm's ult, and that is why she is number 1 on my list. She's so fun to use, so easy to use, and very powerful. And just before we wrap up the video, I want to give a quick shout out to some of the other Duelist characters in this game. There's still 14 other heroes I haven't even mentioned that definitely deserve a shout out. And for the most part, I appreciate this is always going to be a controversial list, and there are some heroes, maybe even all of the heroes I've named, that you think don't belong in this list. But for me, this is the 5 best, most versatile, fun, powerful, and easy to use heroes in the game. So firstly, I want to shout out to Namor, who I think is one of the easiest and most fun characters to use in the game. Someone I use quite often when I can, just to try change it up, because I'm primarily a tank. Someone I think is super powerful and effective, depending on who you have on your team, and easily could be subbed into this list. And if you're a fan of Namor in the comics, just like me, you'll understand when you've used him that he's actually really powerful, especially when you pair him with the right teammates, which I've explained in this video before. He's super effective, but I just find that you need too many of the right pieces in place for him to be in this top 5. I also want to mention Psylocke, Magik, and Wolverine, all 3 of which I think are very good characters and definitely deserve a shout out in this video. One of them you could definitely put into this list for sure. I wouldn't put more than that because they're very similar in style, but if you've played against a good one of those 3 characters, you know exactly how problematic they are for your tanks and your healers, so it's definitely worth considering using them. I mean, for the most part, I could shout out all of the DPS characters like Punisher and Mr. Fantastic, as they're also very good characters, but this list would go on forever, so maybe I should make a video for the top 19 DPS characters in the game and rank them from best to worst. So let me know what you think down below on who you think your top 5 are in this game. And if you did like the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.